Welcome into Hitting Hard with Jon Chuckery on Locked On Sports Atlanta on this Tuesday. Have the Falcons found their next dynamic duo? Do the Braves need to make any additions, or they just need the guys they have to try to perform a little bit better? And is anybody besides Trae Young worth keeping on this roster? That and more. It's a busy day on a Tuesday. Hitting Hard with Jon Chuckery on Locked On Sports Atlanta.
This is Hittin' Hard with Jon Chuckery, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta. And it starts now.
Thanking you so much for being a part of the show today. It's Hitting Hard with Jon Chuckery here on Locked On Sports Atlanta. Head over to youtube.com, put Locked On Sports Atlanta into your browser, search us, find us, subscribe, give us a review, leave us a comment, tell us what you think about the show. I always read through all the comments, so thanks so much for being a part of the ever-growing community. And, of course, follow me on my personal Twitter page at JMCH316. You know, when it comes to the NFL, I have always been a big fan of really good secondaries. Always love when you've got, especially in the old days, of a couple of corners and a couple of safeties. I always love really good secondaries. You know, the old Oakland Raiders when they had Lester Hayes and Mike Haynes, you know, that group of guys. I mean, those are always one of my favorite positional groupings. One of the things that made me a Falcons fan in the early 90s is when they had Deion Sanders, Tim McKyer at corner, and they had Scott Case and Brian Jordan at safety. Then you fast forward, several years, a bunch of years, where you had Ricardo Allen and Keanu Neal that really were anchors in the Falcons secondary and obviously were part of the Super Bowl team. And, we know how that ended. But anyway, I look now and I wonder if Richie Grant and Jaylinn Hawkins can't be that next dynamic duo for the Atlanta Hawks. So Bleacher Report did an article here recently talking about the best kept secret on every team. For the Atlanta Falcons, they picked safety Jaylinn Hawkins. And I'm going to read you what they had to say. In 2021, Jaylinn Hawkins took the field for 49% of the Falcons' defensive snaps, though he made enough plays on the ball to earn consideration for an expanded role in the upcoming season. The 2020 fourth rounder finished with 24 tackles, 1 for loss, 3 pass breakups, 2 INTs through 14 games, including 4 starts. After a year of the Falcons with Daron Harmon, and Eric Harris going in his age 32 campaign. As a second rounder from the 2021 draft, Richie Grant has upside, but the Hawkins showcased more of his potential last year. Dean Pease sees a bright future for the upstart talent. Quote, I think we've got 2 young safeties who are going to get their opportunity now this year. And I believe that. And look, Hawkins is a guy who had a reputation at Cal, maybe play a little bit reckless at times. He would pick up some penalties. You know, he was definitely a really good on-the-ball safety. He was a guy that was very much a ball hawk, but played a little bit out of control and had to kind of fine-tune that. You saw a little bit of that in his rookie year as well. Sometimes maybe being a little bit of, out of control. But came into training camp last year with an opportunity to get some looks and get some playing time, and really kind of flourished in camp and played well in the preseason to where, as we mentioned, 49%, of the snaps. And I know that's not a big number or what have you, but when you're trying to work in corners and safeties and things like that, we've talked before on the show that's a tough position to just throw guys into. But I look at Richie Grant and his 23.5% of the snaps from last year, and Hawkins with his 49% of the snaps. Look, they did what they had to do last year. Whether it was Fabian Moreau or Daron Harmon or Eric Harris, they just kind of got by. But let's be honest, those guys have zero upside. And when I say zero upside, I'm even being charitable in that. So I'm really looking forward to the idea of, okay, we've got Terrell and Hayward as our 2 outside corners. And I know it's a different league now, and we'll talk about that in just a second, but I understand it's a different league. But the idea of Grant and Hawkins now being their safety tandem. Now, again, in today's NFL, you have to have another corner, or your safety's got to be good enough to play nickel to where he can cover and things like that. I think Richie Grant can do that. Richie Grant has showed in college maybe not as much yet in the pros, but he certainly showed in college that he can both be a guy who comes up and supports on the run or be a guy that can handle covering pass catchers coming out of the backfield or coming out, as wide receivers. He can handle both those roles. I'm really excited about the idea of what Dean Pease can do with these two guys. And we heard a lot about Dean Pease talking last year, just about the complexity of his playbook, right? We heard, well, I installed 30%, leading up into week 1, and then we had to scale it back another 5%. And, by the midway point of the season, he's like, yeah, we're back up to like 35%. Right? He's got all these complexities. Now, again, I'll let you figure out what all that is and why and everything else, out there. But I think having a year in this system, I think if you look at this Falcon secondary, it has the chance to be a group that really grows. We talked last week about AJ Terrell maybe being the best draft pick since Julio Jones, but the addition of Casey Hayward, the emergence of Grant and Hawkins, this to me feels like the group that if we're going to see a group of guys get from one level really up to a next level, it might be the secondary. And I think that's going to be, look, I'm not worried about AJ Terrell. I know what Terrell is. I'm really not worried about Casey Hayward, but the safety play, that was a key component in the Falcons defense with Dan Quinn. And I understand it's a different style of defense. And, Cam Newton was a first round pick. And, I've always said that if you looked up the definition of a Dan Quinn player in a Wikipedia or dictionary, you'd see a picture of Ricardo Allen's face on there. He wasn't drafted by Dan Quinn's regime. That was a Mike Smith pick, but he fit the mold of exactly what Dan wanted, being that captain on the field, calling the plays, and obviously running that secondary. And then Neal was a guy who, before the injuries, he could run, he could hit, he could cover a little bit, had to work on his pass coverage and things like that. But I'm excited to see the upside that Grant and Hawkins can bring this year. And if we're talking about that next dynamic duo, like I said, I remember it was Scott Case and Brian Jordan, and those guys were different style players, but I fell in love with that secondary group that the Falcons had. I feel like I'm about to fall in love again with this grouping. And I'm hoping that Hawkins and Grant, because to me, look, Falcons have been one of the worst pass defenses in the entirety of the NFL. The number one thing they have to do to fix that is they have to sack the quarterback more. It's not about cornerback play, safety play, things like that. The number one way you're going to improve your pass defense is put the quarterback on the ground, because 3rd and 5 versus 3rd and 15 is two totally different things in the NFL. And having the ability to change up down and distance completely throws offenses off, and you make life more difficult than obviously, putting the quarterback on the ground and losing a play. I mean, we don't have to explain all that, right? We got all that and understand all that. But after sacking the quarterback, the idea of having defensive backs that can cover, having safeties that can come up and support in the run, or have enough ball hawk abilities to be able to cover, play on the ball, make some turnovers, because that's another thing that we really haven't spent much time on with the Falcons is just creating more turnovers, taking and putting, so often our offense would put our defense in some bad situations because of some turnovers, just inopportune times with turnovers. Turnovers are such a big thing in the NFL. It can be a complete game changer in the league if you can find a way to get more turnovers. And I like the idea of Hawkins and Grant being able to be a couple of guys that can do that. So I'm excited. I'm hoping this is our next dynamic duo back there. And I think there's a lot of expectations this year. And I think they've got the right guy in Dean Pease to coach him up. Let's just see if they can deliver. All right, when we come back, do the Braves need any roster changes, or is it just they need the guys they have to start producing a little bit more? We'll talk some Braves up next. Hitting Hard with Jon Chuckery on Locked On Sports Atlanta.